latest edition of Cult Classics Movies. I'm delighted now to be joined by a true Hollywood icon, the one and only Vernon Wells, as we discuss this week's Cult Classic movie, all the way back in 1985, the classic action film Commando, which Vernon Wells played the lead antagonist role, Bennett. I suppose, Vernon, 1985, a long time ago now. Does it sometimes when you think, when you look back on it or reflect back on that sort of time, does it feel almost like a lifetime ago, or sometimes does it almost feel like yesterday that you were back filming, shooting sort of scenes, or your memory's so vivid of your time on that set?
You know, it's funny because I'd come to America to do Weird Science. As you know, I'm an Australian, so I was living in Australia. I hadn't done a lot of work. It wasn't really where I saw myself going. I saw myself behind the camera. I loved directing and I loved all that part. But I'd come over to America and I'd done Weird Science, and the producer of that, Joel Silver, said he was doing another film after he completed Weird Science called Commando, and he would love for me to meet the director because he thought I would be perfect for the protagonist against Arnold Schwarzenegger. I had no idea who Arnold Schwarzenegger was. Being an Australian, you know, his name wasn't big for us. So I went and met with the director, and he said that he really didn't want me to be in the film because he felt I would be too much of a Wes character from Mad Max, and that's not what he was looking for. So I sort of went back to Australia, and then about probably 3 months later, my agent rang me and said, "You got to get on a plane and get back to America. They need you for Commando." So I flew back, and I started working on Commando the day after I arrived in America. I had no lead time, no time to recover from a very long flight. I virtually arrived, went to bed, got up, and went to the set. Costuming and everything was done there, makeup, wardrobe, you know, everything. And my first scene with Arnold was the one where he's tied to the table, and I put the knife to his throat, and I say, "If I'd had my way, I would have cut your throat." And it took a little while for Annie to get used to the way I work. I'm very laid back, you know. I kind of watch what's going on, look at everything, do the rehearsals. I really don't look like I'm doing anything until they press the button and go action, and then I become the character, you know. And Arnie apparently requested from Joel Silver that he never allow me to have a real knife. He was just a little worried about the fact that I might actually cut his throat. But we got on really well. We had a lot of fun together, and that was my first thing into. I didn't know a lot about Commando when I first came over, only what I'd learnt when I was here, and I didn't know anything about Arnie when I first arrived in, or Dan Hedaya when I first arrived in America. So for me, it was a learning experience all the way, but it was such a good ride. It was like being on an e-ticket, man. It was up and down and wild.
I suppose, Vernon, one thing that struck me, you said there you sort of went for the audition role and you were unsuccessfully. You came back to Australia. They actually had cast Wings Hauser in your sort of role, and he got dismissed on the sort of job. But they had actually all the costumes and everything. They had it all fitted and sized for him. So actually, when you came on the set, that you had to wear his all. There wasn't enough time you to fit into his whole ensemble and his rig out and everything.
Yeah, basically, I never knew who actually. I'd never inquired, to be honest. You just told me. That's the first time I've ever known who the gentleman was that was cast in the role. But yes, I had to wear his coat. They let out some of it. They tried to make, but certain things they couldn't, like the vest. They couldn't let that out. I had to wear that, and it was, you know, it didn't really fit me. And the leather pants and things, they let them out at the back a little bit to try to make it easier for me. But yeah, it was virtually the costume that he had. And I have no idea why he was dismissed. I had not a lot of, I never asked. I didn't feel that it was my place to sort of go, oh, and what happened to the last guy? I just went over and did my job, and kicked Arnie's ass for an hour and 25 minutes before he kicked mine. But what the hell?
And I suppose, Vernon, the whole aspect of Commando is really a sort of an action sort of movie. The first real sort of action hero, you know, they use the Thai characters, the sort of action hero. This was a real sort of action hero type sort of a movie, a real sort of guns, bravo, chew bubble up, kick ass and chew bubble gum sort of type of movie. That a real sort of rhetoric sort of for a real sort of a sort of teenage boy, adolescent man loving type of movie that was all in common in the 80s, and it really ticked all those boxes.
Oh yeah, it was just one of the and probably, excuse me, it was probably one of the better 80s movies. I mean, and it was very kish. I mean, you had all these one-liners which were hysterical. And, you know, 4,000 people attacking Arnie and he killed them all. You know, it was one of those wonderful movies where we used to call it where you don't have to think. You know, all it was sheer entertainment. There was no thought pattern to it. You didn't go in and come out going, wow, shit, you know, they really showed me something there about world politics. You didn't have to, you went in, you came out and you went, wow. You know, he shot 400 people and never changed the magazine. It was kind of like one of those wonderful movies. And everybody loved it. And still today, if I do a convention, people will come up and talk to me for 20 minutes about that film. They really, really, and I'm talking about kids that are in their 20s and maybe, you know, early 20s that weren't born when it was bloody done, probably. Who still get a kick out of it and love it, and because it was that superhero cartoon movie that everybody loved and everybody enjoyed, and still people continue today. Aside, you know, like you said you'd kill me last, Arnie, and he goes, I lied. You know, people forever are throwing that line at me when I meet them. So it touched people in a way that they really enjoyed, and you know, I feel very proud of that, to be honest, that we did a movie that's still talked about today.
And I suppose, Vernon, some of the locations that were shot in throughout California, some real historic sort of places that you sort of shot. Actually, one of the in scenes in terms of the house, the mansion that you shot, was actually used in Beverly Hills Cop in terms of Axel Foley as well. That sort of house, that mansion as well. So 45 days to shoot this sort of movie in terms of from the time you arrived on sort of set. And was that really the norm back then in terms of shooting a movie like Commando, in terms of the block shooting and probably the offset location shooting that was involved in it?
Yeah, I mean, they probably could have shot it quicker if we didn't use some of the location, because we went all the way up the coast and shot some scenes up there at a big mansion which has a big area into the ocean. We also used John Wayne's boat, the Spruce Goose, not the Spruce Goose, the Grey Goose. His boat, John Wayne's boat, was the boat that I had, and when that mansion you're talking about, it actually was the mansion of an actor from the silent era, very famous. He wore glasses and he was famous for hanging from the light, from the clock tower in one of his scenes. That was his, and it was just a wonderful place. But we shot there. We shot on all of the end sequences, the boiler room and all that was at 20th Century Fox, I believe, in their actual studio. We shot in probably 4 or 5 big locations, which was kind, you know, Hearst Castle was the one up the coast that we shot at, with the pier that went out into the ocean where the boat tied up and all that kind of stuff, where I brought Alyssa Milano off. So yeah, and you know, that was about the norm for a movie of that kind and that size. But we all worked hard. I mean, we were going continuously, just letting it out and getting it done. It was fun.
I suppose, Vernon, when you saw the script, obviously you auditioned for the role of Bennett, but when you arrived and you saw the sort of the full script for the whole movie of Bennett, what was your take on this? Your sort of character Bennett, in terms of how did you want to portray him, and how did you want him to sort of look in terms of that sort of macho type ego as well, that he had to have, that sort of full confidence, that bravo sort of the era, I suppose the era of invincibility that Bennett felt that he had. He felt he was almost invincible, godlike.
Strangely enough, I never auditioned for it.
Okay.
I went and saw the director, and when Joel rang me and told me to come over to America to join, I had never auditioned. I didn't see the script until the day I began shooting.
Okay.
So I didn't have a lot of, I knew what the character was because of going and talking to the director. So I had a fair idea. The way I looked at it was that Bennett wanted to be Arnold. He wanted to be Matrix. And there was this whole thing between the two of them, that Bennett always considered himself to be better than Matrix. And so that was the conflict of the whole film. And the way that I looked at him, I didn't look at him as a godlike figure. I looked at him as someone who felt that he'd been slighted by Matrix and the whole team, because he was the loose cannon. He was the one that would go off and do stupid. So he'd been fired out of the whole team. And I think that was the part that got him motivated enough to try to prove that he was better than Matrix. And that was the whole thing of the film. Was the only way he could get Matrix to fight him, to see who was the best, was if he took something that was very dear to him, which was his daughter. And so that was the catalyst for the whole thing of bringing us together and us fighting out to see who was the better man. And also I'd become like a lunatic for hire, virtually, helping Dan Hedaya, who was a despot out of South America, and having all these troops that I'd put together to defend him and everything. So it was kind of I looked at my character as being the hero of the film, to be blunt. I didn't consider Arnold to be the hero. I considered my character to be the hero of the film, and Arnold was just a pain in my backside, and that I needed to do everything I could to get rid of him. And that was exactly how I looked at it.
Yeah. I suppose, Vernon, you mentioned there Dan Hedaya and the sort of the dictator sort of thing. That was a trend basically in the 80s, these whole issue of communism and these sort of rogue sort of dictators trying to coups and try to take over countries, and soldiers for hire and mercenaries for hire. It really sort of fell into that sort of a plot, a sort of an ousting, sort of a communist type thing that was very prominent for cinema movie goers, especially in the 80s, as they were seeing it in their TVs screens in front of them on the news the whole time.
Yeah, we were playing off the Cold War, and what had happened in the conflict between America and Russia over in Cuba, things like that. That's where all those movies, what they were playing off was our fear of communism in its own way. And so you always had, somewhere in a good action movie of that type, you always had the dictator somewhere that had to be destroyed or beaten. And it was the hero. I mean, Arnie played the American hero who was going to defend America from the communist or whatever threat it was. And I played the pivotal part of that threat by being the one person who had a chance of actually beating him. So, and this was the whole thing, it was like Superman, Batman, any of them. They all played on that whole theory of we had to defeat this type of thing. We had to defeat communism. We had to defeat these dictators. We had to show people that living as Americans did, was much better than being under the heel of one of these people. So I think that's where it all came from. And a lot of films came out very much like that, that were very successful. And, you know, Commando just happened to be one of them, and probably the funnest one of all of them.
I suppose, Vernon, talking about Arnie now, Arnold Schwarzenegger in the movie, and I suppose you might have heard this. I don't know if you don't know this already, but originally the producers were on the lines of Gene Simmons and Nick Nolte before they cast Arnold Schwarzenegger in the role. And looking back on it now, would have been an awful sort of different movie in Commando if it was yourself trying to take down Gene Simmons, I imagine.
Well, actually, the funny part of it is Gene Simmons owned the rights to Commando. Way back, I ran into Gene Simmons a few years after I had done that film at a party. And he came up to me and he said, "I need to talk to you." And I was like, looking up at him. He's 6'4". He's a big mother. And I said, "What?" And he said, "I got a beef to pick with you." He said, "I own the rights to Commando. And for some reason, I neglected to up my rights, and it went into turnover, and 20th Century Fox got it. Or Universal. Who was it? Universal? Universal got it. Or, no, it was 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox got the rights to the film. And he said, if I had kept it, I was going to play your role."
Okay.
And I said, "Oh, I see. Damn." And he said, "Actually, they were much smarter using you because you did a better job than I would have." So it was kind of fun, but I never realized that he was up to play Arnold's role as well. That's interesting. You full of things that I didn't know. That would have been interesting because he's a big boy. I mean, he truly is. He's a big man. Yeah, because I'm about as big as Arnold. I think there's like half an inch between us, but with Gene, it would have been about 3 inches between us. But yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose in terms of Arnold, I know you still have a great sort of friendship, but on the time working in terms of Commando, it was probably Arnold's, I'd say, beginning of his career. He was beginning to sort of launch himself into that sort of a star as well. Did you see that sort of drive, that sort of work ethic in him, in a young Arnold Schwarzenegger, to try and make it to the top? Was he really dedicated to his craft?
You know, Arnold makes it to the top in whatever he does. He just continues. He's one of these people that will not let failure be there. There's no such word as failure in the Arnold dictionary. And so on the set, he was always trying to make it better, trying to make everything work. He was always working to make the film better and to make it the best it could be. And I think down deep inside, he probably realized that this was a chance to launch himself into these films or into this genre, which was suitable for him because of his size and what he was. And the other side of him was that he was just a big kid. I mean, he was like a big kid in a toy shop. He was playing with everything. He used to drive me insane. It was just like having this big kid around you that you really couldn't kick his butt because he'd kick yours back and it would probably hurt. So we got on famously. You know, we always had this running thing going between us, and I think that was part of what sold in the movie too, that you did see the camaraderie between the two characters. That was not this sort of cardboard cutout. That there was actually a nice little thing between us, which I liked. And but Arnie, yeah, no, you could see that Arnie was going to go on. There was nothing that was going to stop him. It was that simple. You know, he was on his way and he was going to make it, and that was the end of it. And he did. And God bless him. I wished him all the best.
And I suppose, Vernon, you talk about established stars at the time, and one of the most sort of established stars in your movie at that time was Bill Duke. I spoke to Bill in terms of his role in sort of Predator as well, and he was a really sort of sophisticated, sort of a polished sort of actor, sort of real, sort of calm, sort of composing, sort of, I'd say he brought that sense of he's just the look alone that he would give. It was sort of menacing or intimidating, and he certainly brought that to Commando as well. And he was a real big part. His fight scene in the hotel with Arnold Schwarzenegger was probably one of the highlights in back in terms of fight scenes of the 80s.
No, he was wonderful. Bill Duke is a wonderful person. I mean, he's just a beautiful man. Great director too. But no, he was wonderful in it. And you know, the whole supporting cast was really top notch. I mean, they really were. They were all very, very good. And I've stayed in touch with a couple of them. Which our beloved female lead, whom I adore, I've stayed in touch with her on and off for all the years since we made that film. But everybody in it, you know, were just the best of the best. They really were. And Bill, he was one of the best, and a gentleman's gentleman. And I still would say that to anybody today. He's a gentleman's gentleman, and a fine man, and a great actor. I mean, real wow.
And I suppose, Vernon, I know your character Bennett was killed off in terms of Commando, and obviously that would have implicated your sort of role going forward. But do you know yourself, was there ever any sort of talks in the works of maybe running a TV series, a retake of sort of Commando, looking at the Matrix sort of unit, or future movies down the line, or did you always see it as the one-off sort of cult classic sort of project? I know sometimes at movies like take The Great Anchorman, they sort of released a sequel and it sort of took the gloss away from the original one. Did you always want to have Commando stand on its own 2 feet?
It was really, when we did it, it was kind of like a one-off, but as we were doing it, people were talking about, well, maybe a prequel to establish the team and what they'd done, and how I came to be who I was and why. And then that would lead up to that film. But of course, that never went anywhere. People have often said to me, oh, I've heard on the grapevine that they're doing a sequel to Commando. And it's like, well, why? You know, it worked. It was amazing that you couldn't do it today. That's the point. That's what people don't understand. You just could not do it. There was talk at one stage of redoing Commando when they were doing all those redoing those other Arnie movies. They were going to redo Commando. Why? I mean, you couldn't make it work again. It worked because
take the gloss off it.
Of all the people in it and the way we all got on. You just wouldn't. It wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. It'd be kind of a silly endeavor, actually.
And I suppose, Vernon, your character Bennett, he's sort of idolized in terms of the sort of bad guys, in terms of action sort of heroes, the sort of villains and stuff. And your sort of fight scene with Arnie at the end, it was sort of iconic in so many ways. It had so many great one-liners. And was that the way it was originally planned, that you would go out and you would lead your demise in that sort of scene?
Yeah, it was that was the script. It just that it turned out to be a lot of fun. Well, it turned out to be a lot of pain. But Arnie loved it. And actually, when we were doing that scene, I had fractured my elbow. And so I was kind of in a little bit of pain doing it. And every time I hit him in the kidneys, when we're doing the fight scene, what's it feel like to be a dying man, doing that whole thing. And then when he put me in the arm lock, it kind of, that was a little bit of fun, just that part there. But we got through it. It was a rough movie. As I say to people, it was a little bit like two guys, two linebackers who just wanted to see who could pee up the wall in the toilet the highest. We were always competitive when we were working. Always. We were just very competitive when we were doing things. And I think that added to the tone of the film and brought out the best in us and everybody else, because I was always on my toes. very competitive doing that film. Working with Arnie, because you didn't have a choice. With Arnie, you either do it and go in there wholeheartedly, or he's just going to walk all over you. And I was fortunate enough that that didn't happen, but it was fun. I mean, it really was. It was hard but fun.
And I suppose that Vernon, one thing that struck me, you sit there about the stunts and doing you doing stunts, and yourself and Arnie doing stunts, but there was also 54 stunt performers on the film. In terms of extra sort of cast, in terms of all the other sort of stunts that went on in the film. That's normally more than you'd have in the cast for an entire sort of film, in terms of to have that many sort of backroom sort of stunts casting. What was that like, coming into work every day shooting scenes, and I was trying to remember, this is this stunt guy and this is this stunt guy and he's doing this and he's doing that, and all the sort of people coming in and about doing all these sort of different sort of stunts. It must have been almost felt like a martial arts set, or a karate set, walking into sometimes.
It was, you know, the funny thing was, when we were shooting, it was the norm, you know, was what we were doing. We were always there. There was always stunt guys around us. Arnie and I did a lot of our own stunts. As I said, we're very competitive and we were always doing things. That's how I hurt my elbow, was going through the wall. But the stunt guys were usually in the bigger scenes, you know, the big fight scenes and the big battle scenes. So they were kind of in scenes that we really, Arnie was the only one in most of those. I really didn't get to be involved with a lot of stunt guys. I was involved with stunt guys on a smaller basis when I was working. But you know, I grew up when I lived in Australia and did Road Warrior and stuff. I did a lot of stunts, and because I grew up on a farm, so you know, driving things, shooting things, riding things was all natural to me. So I was used to doing those things. So it just parlayed over into what I did here. So a lot of the easier stunts I would do myself, simply because I could do it. I wasn't, you know, afraid of getting hurt until I got hurt, and then I was afraid of getting hurt. Oh, hurt. But apart from that, no, it was fine. And I have to give kudos to the stunt guys. They put up with a lot of crap from all of us. And we really got into it and enjoyed it.
And I suppose, Vernon, one thing that I started doing the research that came across was actually one of your sort of fight scenes with Arnie. Arnie asked the director, Mark Lester, to give you a real sort of knife, to take away the sort of plastic knife and to do the sort of scene with a sort of a real sort of knife. So that was almost putting an awful lot of trust in your hands.
Yeah, I think for most of the film, I had a real knife on my hip. Only when I was brandishing it and threatening Arnold did I have a fake one. But you know, it wasn't really trusting me with anything. There was no way I was going to take it out of that scabbard. I was more afraid of cutting myself than cutting Arnold with it. But yeah, it was. You know, Mark had a lot of faith in all of us. He really did. He let us go places where we needed to go to make the characters work, which was great on his part. I mean, he believed in what we're doing, and he believed we could carry it off. And you know, as I said, originally Mark had said no to me because he had a whole different idea, but he never, at any stage, I have to say, at any stage when I came onto the film, did he ever treat me like, you know, I wanted someone else to do this, God damn it, and now I'm stuck with you. He never, ever did that. He treated me like I was the one that had been cast into the film, and he worked with me through everything. So I have to give him kudos for the fact that he was a gentleman enough not to hold any regrets about not having what he thought that should be in the film. So everything else, I mean, we played, we had guns and we could shoot people. And at the end of the day, they got up and went, yeah, that was fun. Get all your aggression out. You've got no idea.
Yeah.
Being the villain, man, you never have a mean bone in your body. Every time you're pissed off, you just get a stuntman and kick the crap out of him on the set. So, you know, all of the aggression comes out there. So I'm always smiling.
And I suppose, Vernon, the penultimate question for you now, the second sort of last question. In your eyes, the phrase cult classics, and in terms, it's used quite a lot, and sometimes it's been overused. And what does that sort of mean to you? What does, in terms of, if someone said to you a cult classic movie, in terms of what does that sort of mean to you? What does that term sort of mean to you?
I don't consider it to be a classic movie in that sense. To me, a classic movie is Gone with the Wind and films of that ilk. But what I consider it to be is that it is a classic movie of its type. And if you look at it for what it is, it's a classic movie of its type, because today it's still talked about. People know what Commando is. How many movies from that era do people actually remember? You know, there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 big films that people remember. The rest of them, they're forgotten. So to just be remembered from that era means that that film had something that people got into and liked. And so that makes it a classic film in that sense. But in the sense of being a cinematic classic, no, I don't see it as that. But I do see it as a classic movie of its genre, and a very good film for its genre.
And I suppose, Vernon, the sort of final question for you, and probably the hardest one that I'll ask you. Let's say your character Bennett was put into a sort of villain's action hero sort of type of dictionary, and they left 2 sentences blank underneath him to describe Bennett. And they asked you, Vernon Wells, having portrayed the character Bennett, to write those 2 sentences. What would you like those 2 sentences to read?
Bennett was a man driven by his own principles, who would do what he needed to do to secure his position and the position he felt was rightfully his. Nothing was out of his reach.
On that note, Vernon Wells, a fantastic way to finish off this week's edition, looking back at the cult classic movie back in 1985, Commando, which you played a starring role, playing the one and only Bennett, the chief antagonist to Arnold Schwarzenegger's main character, Matrix. And Vernon, it was a storied character for you. You still have a really renowned career and a really fascinating career with lots of projects, lots of successes, but I'm sure Commando still holds a dear place in your heart. For us, this is this week's cult classic movie. Vernon, thanks a million for giving your time, for sharing your memories of your time on set in terms of Commando, and for you and your family and your loved ones in these troublesome times, stay safe, stay care, and hopefully a prosperous future for you to come.
Thank you, Jim, and the same goes for you, for your family and friends. I wish that they stay safe and secure in these times. And it's been a pleasure, my friend. And anytime you want me back to talk about anything else I've done, I'd be more than happy to come back. You are one of the few people I've ever been interviewed by who comes up with stuff that I didn't even know, which really got me, man. That is so cool. I love it. I love it. So anytime you want to have me back, I'll be back. No problems.
Cheers, Vernon. I'm sure I'll be calling for you sometime again in the near future.
Thank you, my friend. And thank you for appreciating Commando from all of us that actually were in it. It's a joy to be able to sit and talk with somebody who understands what we do for a living.
Cheers. Thank you, Vernon.
Do you think that he is going to give us any problems?
He'll do exactly as he's told.
Hasta luego, fellas.
You're a funny guy, Sully. That's why I'm going to kill you last.